When governments want to silence dissent, they don't always send police. Sometimes they just pull the plug. If you've ever thought of the internet as something that just exists, today's episode is a reminder that for millions of people, connectivity is political, fragile, and very intentionally taken away.
Yeah, and sometimes the most powerful thing a government can do isn't arrest the people in the street. It's just turn off the signal so no one can see it happen.
Yes, exactly. So welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, everybody, the podcast where we look past the headlines and into the actual text of the laws shaping the world around us. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Sarah. And today we're talking about Iran, internet shutdowns, and a cluster of bills in Congress that treat connectivity not as a tech issue, but as a human rights issue. So before we get into Iran, there's a lot happening there currently. I understand that in the UK, you guys are almost the exact same as Iran, where you're just completely taking away all of your rights for the internet, right?
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, if you're on the right in America, then you may well think that. I think JD Vance and Elon Musk regularly claims that the UK is a police state because we try and police what people are saying on X. But as with most of these things, there's a little bit of truth in it as well. So the United States are very much free speech absolutists. You go much, much further than other countries when it comes to free speech. So Americans will often be horrified about what happens in other countries and feel that it's repression, whereas actually it's just perfectly normal. It's you guys that are the outliers here. So in the UK, we have a number of laws that potentially restrict what people are allowed to say and do. So the first one that people are a bit more familiar with, the Online Safety Act of 2023. Now, that was about forcing platforms to remove illegal content, and very illegal, very offensive content. So, child porn, terrorism stuff, all of that kind of thing. But in a way, what we are saying to big tech companies, and this is where Elon Musk obviously gets upset, is no, you're not allowed on X to allow it to undress young girls. That's just not acceptable. And so they were actually investigating X, and there was a lot of talk of banning it in the UK actually because of the recent thing. Now, obviously Elon Musk at first was saying it's fine, you're putting bikinis on girls, what's wrong with that? But he's now rolled that back actually, and they are changing X, so that one looks as though it's being sort of rolled back. But there are other laws that also restrict what you're allowed to say and do. The key one being the 2003 Communications Act. So this one had been around for a long time, and a right-wing government at the time brought this in. And the Communications Act makes sending grossly offensive, indecent, or menacing messages over public electronic networks an offence. So that includes social media, and also causing annoyance or anxiety. So what it basically does is say you're not allowed to harass people online, and if you do, then that's an offence. But it's, as with most laws, it's a little bit vague. How do you interpret it? How do you interpret grossly offensive? How do you interpret menacing or causing anxiety? What level of anxiety are we talking about here? So it's quite difficult. And particularly when you couple that with hate crime legislation. So it's for a long time here, hostility based on race, religion, sexual orientation, all of that kind of stuff is illegal, right? You're not allowed to harass people on the basis of the fact that they're gay or they're black or whatever. But there's a very grey area here. So if you say, for example, I hate black people, that shouldn't be illegal, right? Unpleasant thing to say, but it shouldn't be illegal. Whereas if you say to somebody, I want you to go out and kill black people, then that is illegal. If you say that online, then you will face action, and you may well end up getting arrested. So the police struggle to interpret a lot of these laws, and they tend to err often on the side of caution in that they will investigate potential offences online where most people would agree that common sense says it shouldn't be an offence. In 2023, there were 12,000 arrests made which were related to online posts. So that's about 30 a day. That's more than you'd think, right? It's not the up tweets. But it all came to a head when this one person was sent to prison. Now, most people are arrested for this. You get a caution, right? The police will say, don't do it again, or you might get a fine. But one person was sent to prison for quite some time for something that they posted online. And what they basically said is it was during a series of riots we had, the anti-immigration riots, where a bunch of people turned up to an asylum seeker hostel and tried to set fire to it. So there were people inside and they tried to burn it down. And this person was inciting that. They were saying, go to this place and burn it down. And so they got sent to prison for incitement indictment of attempted murder, right, effectively. So that's a serious crime. But they had become free speech martyr, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff, which clearly they aren't. They're a nasty person who tried to get people murdered. One thing where the government has also gone particularly wrong, and this again is something that it's a complicated area, a lot of grey areas here. So they're never cut and dried about what people should or shouldn't be allowed to do online. And the latest thing is the government has now announced that there's going to be a consultation into bringing in a Australian-style ban on social media for under 16s. Yep. Which is an interesting development. I think that's the way a lot of countries are going now.
Yeah, I definitely think that we're going to be seeing some legislation here this year about that too. Well, let's talk about what's happening in Iran, because it's not necessarily that they're trying to crack down on hate speech or anything like that.
So
they're actually just trying to stop access to the internet as a whole in order to control what people are posting. So this is still a story about control over what goes onto the internet, but in very different circumstances than what we have been talking about with X's porn bots and people tweeting pro-Palestinian action. So
It is. But it's interesting because if you spoke to the Iranian regime, I haven't heard them speaking about this, but I'm sure if you asked them, they would say, the reason we're doing this is because there is violent insurrection in our country. We have terrorists, and the great Satan is putting all these agitators out there, and all we're doing is defending our society by stopping them organizing and spreading their hate online. So, different point of view. I mean, we would obviously disagree with that from what we're looking at and all the terrible things that are happening in Iran. But you can always justify it, can't you, with those same kind of arguments? I doubt very much they would say we're terrible people and we're trying to stop people expressing themselves online.
Correct.
Okay, so, well, yes, let's get into it then. So before we get into the bill numbers, the acronyms, all of the committee referrals and so on, why don't you set the scene for us? So what has been happening in Iran that brought all of this back onto Congress's radar?
Yeah, so late in 2025 and early into this year, 2026, protests spread across Iran again. And you might remember some protests from a few years ago, but these started a little bit differently. These started actually from Iranian businesses going to the streets over an affordability crisis. We're seeing that all over the world. And almost immediately, the government reached for one of its most reliable tools that it likes to employ, a near total internet shutdown. And Iran has actually had its internet shut down since January 8th. And we are recording this on the 21st. So that is literally over 2 weeks or almost over 2 weeks of complete internet blackout there. So mobile data went dark, messaging apps stopped working, outside news disappeared. It's not a glitch. It's a very distinct strategy of the regime.
Yes, so no one's claiming that, oops, so the network went down, what are we going to do? It's very deliberate.
Right, exactly. And these blackouts couldn't be anything more than what is described as deliberate, and might be for what you had just said of Iran trying to say that, there's this violent uprising and we need to quash it and we don't want people inciting violence online or whatever. But they're really isolating the protesters, disrupting any type of organizing that could be happening, and preventing the outside world seeing what's happening there on the ground. There have been confirmed reports of mass casualties of protesters who were in the streets, and there's a lot of stuff going on there that it seems more like the vibe is that Iran doesn't want the world to see it, rather than they're trying to keep it calm and try not to get the unrest out of control, which definitely is part of it. But the ways that they're also employing tactics to do that, I think they really don't want the rest of the world to see.
Yes.
And this playbook is not new. It's rooted in lessons that the regime learned during the woman life freedom protests back in 2022 and 2023.
All right. Okay. So let's rewind a little bit then. Why does that movement matter so much for understanding what's happening today and the legislation that's being proposed?
This is because the woman life freedom protests are really a turning point in Iran, but also in the general world's view of what's going on in Iran. This was one of these protests that really broke through the zeitgeist of most people. When this protest started, it was when a lot of us got a true understanding of what it could actually mean to be a woman there living under the Taliban, and with these types of laws there that are for the morality laws. And they have this group of police there called the morality police. And it's a very male-dominated, controlled society where only a man's point of view about something matters, and women are subjected to a lot of hurt and honestly very terrible things. And this all begun after Masha Amini died in morality police custody. And it was because she wasn't wearing the correct head covering that they want the women to wear to, remain modest. And this quickly became something bigger. Women were cutting their hair off in the streets. They were dyeing it blue. It was a huge protest. It was everywhere. There was a lot of chants for women life freedom all over the place. And it was a real nationwide challenge to the state authority, the gender discrimination that they tried to impose there, and this general overall repression of what it is to live in Iran. And the government learned throughout this. The regime just didn't let this happen without learning their lessons. Connectivity fuels protest, and it's how people organize. It's how abuses are documented, and it's how the diaspora stays connected to what is happening. It's also how the international community pays attention and starts really caring about these issues as well.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like, yes, it's okay to abuse your citizens. I mean, it's not okay, but we're not going to pay that much attention to it. But if you cut the internet off, that's terrible. Why would you do that? So the internet does become a pressure point.
Yeah, exactly. Shutdowns weren't ad hoc anymore. They were repeatable tools of governance. And when the world saw that these people were rising up, fighting for their rights, and then also the atrocities that were happening while they were doing this, it really did fuel the movement. Again, both in Iran and the global stage, people are talking a lot about what's happening there. It's a lot having to do with the amount of people that were killed after the internet was shut off. But this internet blackout for so many days is just crazy. And when you think about how much it's influencing the people living there, the protesting, or, even if people are just trying to live, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening that just can't get out because there is no way for it to get out. So yeah, this is the backdrop that these lawmakers are looking at when they are proposing this bill that we're about to talk about. So Congress isn't just reacting to Iran and this kind of shut off. It's kind of reacting to the realization that information control in itself is a really true form of power.
It is. And it's somehow deeply sinister, isn't it? A few years ago, before we had this universal coverage of cameras and the internet and so on, it wouldn't have been such a big issue. But nowadays, the idea that you can't upload something to the internet when something terrible happens seems to make everything so much worse because it's happening sort of behind closed doors. It's happening in darkness. But this obviously was the norm for most of human history. It's just now that we can show that spotlight. But it's such a good thing, and that's why we do need to keep the internet on. Okay, so having said that, I think we all agree that we would like to help Iran as much as possible get their story out. So let's get into the actual legislation. The centerpiece here is HR 6469. So what is it and what does it actually do?
Yeah, so HR 6469 is formally called the Feasibility Review of Emerging Equipment for Digital Open Media Act, or thankfully, the Freedom Act. So I have to say that whole bill title.
So tortured. Seriously, guys, come on.
These are the acronyms we do like. The first and kind of most important thing to understand is what this bill doesn't do. It doesn't mandate Starlink drops over Tehran tomorrow. It's not something that is essentially going to deploy the internet to Iran if it were to pass. It doesn't order agencies to get that hardware out there. Instead, it forces the US government to get really serious and honestly honest about whether alternative connectivity is actually viable for places around the world, but with a very intense focus on Iran.
Okay, so this bill isn't so much about action then. It is a study bill, effectively. But it's not a fluff study. Often you find these bills we really don't know what to do, so let's just do a study. Then it looks like we're doing something, but we're never actually going to do anything. You think this one perhaps is a bit more serious than that?
I do think it's more serious. I think probably when this was initially proposed, you probably couldn't have seen that we were going to be where we are now. And so I think maybe it was a fluff and now it's definitely serious. This is something that a lot of people who aren't even necessarily super engaged in the political world are knowing, that there's been this incredible shutdown and it's due to access constraints. And a lot of the reporting talks about, I have a friend of a friend has the access to Starlink and that's how I'm able to, get this reporting out or understand that my parents are alive or other things like that. But this bill directs the Secretary of State, working with the FCC and the Treasury Department, to produce a detailed report to Congress within 120 days of enactment. And that report has to evaluate whether emerging technologies like direct-to-cell satellite services and other non-traditional tools could provide reliable internet access in Iran without relying on regime-controlled infrastructure.
Okay, so what kind of details then is Congress looking for in the report?
Well, they're looking to get granular, I can tell you that. So this bill requires an assessment of a few things. The first is who owns and controls Iran's telecom infrastructure, then whether alternative systems can realistically bypass these state networks that they do have set up, and then how capable is the Iranian government at jamming or countering these emerging technologies that could theoretically be deployed, and then what the U.S. security risks are, both for users inside Iran and for U.S. interests in the region, but also for like supply chains of us smuggling in these devices and other things like that. So it's really kind of every single thing that you could possibly need to know seems to be unknown given this bill. But crucially, the report must be unclassified to the greatest extent possible.
That is a huge deal there, and it's a really good thing to see. So this isn't something that's just going to disappear into the bowels of the State Department and never see the light of day again. No, they're going to have to publish it, and so the press can get hold of it, and it can be used as a driver for action as well. So that's a really nice thing to see.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think about what that could mean even just for deploying it. If they decide that they do want to, then Iran knows that it's deployed, and maybe that'll kind of have a counterintuitive effect. But it also means that lawmakers, NGOs, researchers, even the public can evaluate these findings and find out more. And this isn't meant to disappear into a skiff is really what this is a lot of the stuff with the Middle East and trying to figure out anything like this is kind of, we're doing something and then you never hear about it again. But you can actually track this bill text, sponsors, and the status on BillTrack50.com.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, we love open access to things. We love being able to read stuff. That's exactly why BillTrack50 is here, so everyone can read their bills. Okay, so you mentioned Starlink earlier. What's happening on the ground right now?
So estimates suggest that there are around 50,000 clandestine Starlink terminals in use inside Iran. And they're keeping some people connected, but the Iranian government has started actively targeting these. And that raises questions that the bill is trying to surface. How do you smuggle in the hardware safely? How do you protect users from being identified and having it shut off, but then also facing the repercussions of having black market internet device where they're getting information out? And then what happens when connectivity itself is putting these people at risk relating to torture, murder, like whatever might be happening there? It's really kind of a very sticky, scary situation.
It is. So this isn't just tech for optimism then. This seems like a very real thing.
Yes, this is not the people who are like geeking out over the fact that Starlink is on United and their upload quality is so amazing. But HR 6469 treats connectivity as a strategic problem, not a gadget problem. And that is one reason that this issue really stands out.
Yes. So the blog also talks about two other bills that aren't Iran specific, but still matter here. So let's start with having a look at Senate Bill 2480.
Yeah, so that's the Telecom, Cybersecurity, and Transparency Act. It requires the Department of Homeland Security to publicly release the unclassified report of U.S. telecommunications insecurity 2022 within 30 days of enactment.
2022 report? Once this is like a blast from the past, isn't it? So is it all about airing our own dirty laundry?
Yep, exactly that. And that is the point. So if the U.S. wants credibility when criticizing internet repression abroad, it has to be honest about its vulnerabilities at home. And this bill says that telecom security shouldn't live only behind these classified doors.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we can all agree with that. And then there's the Report Act, Senate Bill 848. So how does that one fit in?
Yeah, so the Report Act requires senior federal officials to publish an unclassified report after terrorist investigations conclude. It outlines what happened, what failed, and what should change with a 5-year sunset. It's about accountability after crisis, and while it focuses on terrorism, it reinforces a broader theme running through these bills. The public deserves answers about how information systems fail.
So if you zoom out there, what's the legislative through line here?
Well, information is power. These bills operate in different lanes: foreign policy, cybersecurity, domestic security, but they all treat transparency and access as a core to democratic infrastructure. Whether it's an internet blackout in Tehran or a vulnerability in the US telecom networks, Congress is increasingly saying control over information shapes rights, accountability, and trust.
Okay, so where does this leave us?
Well, for Iranians facing this digital silence, HR 6469 is a step forward understanding and how that silence might eventually be broken. For everyone else, it's a signal that lawmakers are finally treating connectivity as more than just a technical convenience and loving the internet. But if you want to follow how these bills move, or don't for that matter, it is the US Congress after all, Bill Track 50 is the best way to see what's actually happening with these bills beyond just these press releases or, tweets, X, whatever, and these kind of splashy Instagram posts we're seeing.
On that note, then, where are these bills at the moment?
So the Freedom Act and the Report Act are in committee, I'm sure being diligently looked into. And the Telecom Cybersecurity Transparency Act, the one about that 2022 report, has in fact crossed over.
So there's a little bit of movement then, which is always good to see. But of course, we need to remember that, as always, the real story is in the text.
Yep, and that is what we do here. Look beyond that bill number at the text and context.
So thanks for listening to Beyond the Bill Number. If you like this episode, subscribe, share it, and we'll see you next time.